Well, warm welcome to today's talk, Wednesday the 8th of June. I'm going to do a bit of a COVID update today. Hopefully not too many of these left. Cases are going down dramatically in the UK, but are starting to edge up a little bit in the United States. Not particularly worried, but it is noteworthy, and we'll look at why that is related to new variants. Cases also, we assume, sky high at the moment in North Korea, and they've got to be going up in China now as well. But let's start looking a bit of background data. Here we have the cases, which of course are a great underestimate of the total number of infections, but they do give us a bit of an idea as to what's going on. So we see, first of all, New Zealand and Australia. Australia definitely going down, New Zealand going down slightly, and again these do represent the number of infections to a fair extent. United States slight uptick, United Kingdom, Canada fairly low. Now, moving on to hospitalizations. This is the United Kingdom here. Went up quite a bit and now has gone down progressively since about March here. United States was going down nicely, but then there is a slight uptick in the States at the moment. And it looks really quite likely that this is due to new variants in the States, BA.4 and BA.5, as we'll give some evidence for shortly. No indication that it's causing more severe disease per se, just that there's a lot of them coming all at the same time seems to be the issue here. Not expecting it to last for very long either, so not particularly worried, but it is noteworthy. Now, looking on to deaths here, these are sort of live time deaths. So New Zealand, Australia, Canada, United States, United Kingdom. But of course, we always need to put that in context, and we'll see now the cumulative number of deaths. And the United States has done particularly badly, I'm afraid. And we see that on this screen here, cumulative deaths. So this is per million. United States over 3,000 now. United Kingdom not a long way behind, a little bit but not a long way. Canada much lower. Australia, New Zealand, the deaths are recent, and the difference there is that the infection arrived in a vaccinated population. So that's kind of a bit of a background. If we actually look at the status of play in the United Kingdom today in terms of symptomatic cases, we see that there's still quite a lot. There's still over 1.5 million symptomatic cases. Yes, it's down. Then it plateaued out, and you can't make too much of the curve on that line there. But is it tending up just a little bit? Possibly, but it's certainly not going down as it has been in the United Kingdom, which is disappointing, especially with the better weather. But as we saw, fewer people in hospital, which is the important thing. Now, I'm going to point out this graphic here from the United States. Now, this is released today. BA.2, BA.2.12.1, as we know. And here we see BA.5 and BA.4 becoming more prevalent. Now, this data is always out of date. Of course, it's CDC data, but it does show that these new Omicron variants are progressing in the States, and they're increasing in numbers fairly quickly. Not too concerned about it. It's probably going to go through the population fairly quickly. I'm not too concerned about it causing a lot of disease because of the amount of immunity in the States, but it is certainly noteworthy. So here we have the figures here. BA.4 as of today, 5.4% of specimens tested. BA.5, 7.6%. And of course, this was the one that was first detected in South Africa. It's strange that what is going on here is that the Omicron was first detected in South Africa, of course, but all the new variants of Omicron have been detected in South Africa first as well. Now, this is partly because South Africa have got good screening, but there's also probably more going on to it here. Does it seem that a lot of the mutations that are going on in South Africa, in that southern African region, just being picked up in South Africa? Pretty good question. Haven't seen any epidemiologists tackle it, but I'll just leave that one kind of in the air. It's a good question, and it's one I must say that's been irritating me for a week or two now as I've been thinking about this. So BA.4 and BA.5 now 13% of cases in the States. Last week it was 7.5%. So next week I would expect that to be 26%. And the week after that it'll probably be 52%. This does seem to be increasing quite quickly. That is a fairly undeniable trend in the States. And this is what we've seen. We've seen this one replace this one, which replaced Delta. This one, B.2.12.1, replacing BA.2. And now we're seeing BA.4 and 5 likely going to be replacing BA.2.12.1 and BA.2. That seems to be what is happening. Now, interesting from the United Kingdom, we're not really seeing this. So this is the data sources from the United Kingdom, from the government sources. Just so if you want to click on the links, you're welcome to do so. Last 90 days, this is updated as of yesterday for the United Kingdom. BA.1, we've clocked over 2 million of those diagnosed, getting on for 500,000 BA.2s. Now, XE, you might remember, was not a mutant, it was a recombination. It was a recombination of BA.1 and BA.2 together, and we had worries about it, more concerns really. But it's not taken off. It's basically nothing to report there, nothing to see here. So not a lot. I'm not worried about that one. Well, I mean, it's still causing some cases, but it's not a majority, and it's not taking over. BA.4, BA.5, basically not happening in the United Kingdom. So this is curious. I think I've got more questions than answers on today's video. Why is the BA.4 and 5 increasing dramatically in the States, but not in the United Kingdom? Not particularly obvious, but we'll keep an eye on that and see if we can work it out. Office for National Statistics, a percentage of the community that had COVID-19 going down quite a lot, as we see. This is as of the end of May. 1 in 70 in England, down to 1 in 75 in Wales. Northern Ireland 1 in 75. Scotland 1 in 50 people as well. Again, all fairly dramatically down. Now I'm going to show you some graphics from the Office for National Statistics as well. Here's the first one, the reduction in cases in England going down. And remember, these Office for National Statistics cases are not based on symptoms, they're not based on reports, they're not based on NHS tests, they're based on survey data, and it's very well done. So this is accurate, or as accurate as we can possibly get. So that's the cases in England. Scotland, likewise, very similar pattern. So that is, it's what we expected, and it's good, it's a good reduction. Now, I think we'll look at long COVID now. Now, this is more of a concern. I think the NHS has got, I think the figure was 89 clinics now, looking at long COVID. And this people have still got this after 2 years. So it is concerning. There's a complete spectrum. We've interviewed people on this channel, of course, who are completely disabled with it. Other people have very, very minor symptoms. And because this is self-reported with the Office for National Statistics, there's always the possibility in the Office for National Statistics data, because it's self-reported, that some people might not be reporting as accurately as we would like. But here we have it. Long COVID as of the 1st of May, 2 million people complaining of it in the country. That's 3.1% of the population. Of that 2 million, 72% have had it for 12 weeks, 42% have had it for 1 year, and 19% have had it for 2 years. And of course, 2 years ago, there was much less prevalence of COVID, so that's actually quite a high amount. So quite a lot of people with some long COVID features, as we said, some debilitating, some mild, but for long periods of time. This is an ongoing concern. What proportion of these will turn out to be very long term? We don't know. The answer is probably some of them. Symptoms: fatigue is the main one complained of, shortness of breath, cough, muscle aches are the most common features. And symptoms adversely affected day-to-day activities in 71% of the 2 million that self-reported long COVID. So actually interfering with people's day-to-day activity, whether that's work or family responsibilities, unable to interact normally with normal duties. More long COVID after Delta than Omicron. About now, this is doubly vaccinated people. Now, it's a bit annoying that this is the case, but of course, most people are doubly vaccinated, so it's hard to get an unvaccinated sample now. But self-reported long COVID was almost twice as common after Delta than after Omicron BA.1 infections, and I'm not expecting BA.2 or BA.2 112 or BA.4 or BA.5 to be any different from this. They are very similar. Now, before we go on to North Korea, I just want to look at some more data from the Office for National Statistics. Hospitalizations down. Intensive care admissions have been low all the way through Omicron, but down further. So light blue intensive care, dark blue ordinary hospital admissions, going down really quite nicely, as we would expect indeed, because of the reduction in cases. And this is also very encouraging, this graphic here. Now, this graphic is showing the proportion of people admitted to intensive care because of COVID. And let's have a look at it. So percentage of critical care patients for whom COVID-19 was reported as the primary reason is it's about 40 odd % there. In other words, most people who were admitted to intensive care with COVID, it was an incidental diagnosis. They were admitted with COVID, not for COVID. So that is encouraging, and that again just reflects the high prevalence rates that we've had over the period of time that this data was being collected. So quite a pleasing graphic to see there, really. This is number of deaths registered week by week. Now, still people are dying, but compared to the spikes, dear me, going down fairly consistently, which is what we would expect based on the reduction in prevalence in the UK. So that's again good and encouraging. Now, these next couple of graphics are new. What they're showing is the difference between the people admitted with and for COVID as opposed to ordinary influenza and pneumonia type things. And this particular one looks at deaths. So here we see deaths due to COVID. Now, this is deaths involving COVID, but not due to. So these are deaths with. These are deaths from. And we can see that the vast majority of the deaths here were as a direct result of COVID. And here we see in this graphic, again, we see these proportions. Now, we do notice that the proportions are down. So there's now more people dying. Well, there's about 60, just over 60% of people dying from COVID. But that means there's nearly 40% of people now dying with COVID. But we still see that those figures are fairly high and have been fairly high through the pandemic. So for the majority of the pandemic, the people with COVID at the time of death, it was actually the thing that triggered their death. And this is death certificate data. Now, if you just bear that in mind, I'll just zoom out so you can just see that graphic there again. And then we'll compare it with the one from colds and flu. And here we have it. That's the difference. So these are the differences here. So these are people that died with colds and flu. These are people that died from colds and flu. So the darker line are those that died from, the light blue are those that died with. So we see a lot more people happen to die with colds, flu, pneumonia at the time of death. And this isn't really surprising. And again, if we look at the graphic here, we see that about 22%, around about 20% of people there died. Around about 20% died who happened because of colds and flu, whereas 60% died who happened to have it. So colds, flu, and pneumonia. About 20% there are dying because of that condition, and about 80% are dying coincidentally diagnosed. Now, I was going to say this isn't particularly surprising, because the majority of people that die what you might call a natural death, when in a natural death you have a period of immobility and the person is disabled for a period of hours, days, weeks or months before death. That and the illness and the immobility does predispose towards pneumonia. So the majority of people that are dying from what you might call natural causes are going to have chest infections or pneumonia. That is not surprising. But no doubt about it there that that is showing that more people die from influenza and pneumonia who happen to have it at the time of death rather than the primary cause of death, as opposed to the situation of COVID where it was mostly the primary cause of death. And the last graphic I want to show you today from the Office for National Statistics is the average age of death. Now, the average age of death from COVID in the UK is around about 82. But this actually shows that that is younger than the average age of death from pneumonia and influenza. So COVID is killing people slightly younger. So it's about 84 average there with flu and pneumonia, as opposed to about 82 average with COVID. So people are dying slightly younger with COVID, albeit at in their 80s. Now let's move on to I want to say something about North Korea and China, because there's some interesting tie-ups here. Let's look at North Korea first of all. Now, Mike Ryan, boss of emergencies at the WHO, he doesn't know what's going on in North Korea any more than we do. So the Koreans opened up about a week to 2 weeks ago, saying there was lots of COVID, and they said they didn't want any foreign vaccines. They didn't want any Chinese vaccines. We believe the day after that they sent 2 cargo planes to China for COVID vaccines, and a trainload have since arrived. So Sinovac is now being distributed in North Korea, which is good. Western vaccines are not. But Mike Ryan doesn't know what's going on. They don't have any special information. We have real issues in getting access to the raw data. In other words, he doesn't really know what is going on. It's very difficult to provide a proper analysis to the world when we don't have any access to the necessary data. But they are using Sinovac now. Now, the problem with this Sinovac is, in North Korea now, the Koreans have said that the numbers of COVID cases have gone down dramatically over the past week. I think we can be pretty sure that's a lie, that the COVID Omicron wave is going to take at least a month to go through North Korea, I would have thought. Now, the problem with the Sinovac is they've started giving the Sinovac now, but the Sinovac, after the first dose, it reduces deaths a little bit, not much. After the second dose, it reduces deaths a little bit more, not much. After the third dose, it reduces deaths dramatically. It's more effective than the Western vaccines. But to reduce deaths, you need those 3 courses, 3 doses, and of course that's going to take time, and they've just started far too late. So we're still in a situation where tens of thousands of people are dying in North Korea as we speak, almost certainly. No one knows for sure, but based on the data we had a fortnight ago, I'm afraid that is the case. It's really quite a bad news story. Now, this is from Jean H. Lee, who's a journalist who's visited there many, many times. She says there's chronic food shortages in North Korea since massive famines in the 1990s. Now, in the 1990s, North Koreans did appeal for South Korean help and Western help and ration supply with a lot of food from South Korea and the United States. But since then, it's closed down. But anyway, Jean Lee goes on to say, fruit, vegetables and meat are luxuries. Well, dear me, if they're luxury, what do the people eat all the time? Malnutrition shows. Now, again, she's speaking as a non-medical person, but splotchy skin, unhealthy looking skin, sunken cheekbones, gaunt frames. People there are chronically malnourished. Most hospitals and clinics do not have heat, medicines or supplies. I don't know what it's like in the States, but we've got a joke in the UK that says it's like a pub with no beer. So this is a hospital with no medicines. The majority of hospitals have no medicines. This is the reality of the situation. North Korean nurses have been seeing washing and disinfecting syringes. Not ideal, to put it mildly. Doctors and patients bundle up in quilted jackets over winter because it's so cold. Apparently the only heating that is available is in the operating theatre. Everywhere else is completely cold all winter. Which of course means that patients will be dying who don't need to die. It's just a terrible situation. One North Korean doctor said she relied on preventative cares because she had no medicines. Not even for diarrhoea, which she said kills scores of North Korean children every year. This is just an abomination that this is carrying on. And North Korean who live in mountainous areas, forget it. They'll just get infected and they'll die in the villages. There's no possibility of transport down to the mainland. Now let's just look at China briefly. Here we see, there we go. So here we see China. These are the official figures. This is actually Johns Hopkins data, and John Hopkins has just basically put together the official data, which is questionable. But it's what we have all the way back to April 2020. These are the cases, these are the deaths. How clever they are for getting on top of it with their draconian lockdowns, and there's the recent data that shows the fall off in cases. Now of course they realise that these bizarre lockdowns for zero COVID were not sustainable, so they've just opened up again. That means COVID is going to run rampant through China. So if they're saying they've no cases now, I don't believe them. They're going to come in from abroad and it's going to sweep through the country, and I don't really see any alternative. But anyway, let's look at a particularly interesting case. So this is China in general. Have they only had 14,500 deaths? I don't think so. Anyway. Fully vaccinated fairly high, but as we said, we need ×3 vaccines for the Sinovac to be effective against death. And many of the older people have not been vaccinated. Therefore, there's going to be a lot of deaths in the older age range in China now and in the next few weeks, as indeed in North Korea. But they have given out 3.5 billion doses, but as we said, the older people need a third vaccine. Now, this is interesting. Is SARS coronavirus 2 Omicron blowing in the wind? Well, this official notice here from China seems to suggest that it is. Now, I've been dependent obviously on, well not obviously, I do have Chinese contacts, but I've just used Google Translate for this particular document. Government notice in Dandong, which is near on the Korean border, on the North Korean border. So for a few hundred miles, the North Korean border is directly next to China. And this notice here, part of this says, try not to open windows in southerly weather for residents along the river, that's next to the border, and do not disperse pigeons during the epidemic. So they're actually saying here, and this is consistent with other Chinese data, that this virus might be blowing across the river, which marks the border between North Korea and China, in the wind, might be actually blowing in the wind. Now, how credible that is, I don't know. I suspect it's much more likely that it's being crossing the border with smugglers, because a lot of the people in North Korea depend on trade. The government will call it smuggling, I'd call it free trade. They depend on this free trade to supply the basics of life, like fruit, vegetables and meat, which are all luxuries in North Korea. So this trade has been a lifeline for millions of people in North Korea, but it's a trade that neither government really want to admit exists, but of course everyone knows that it does. But I wanted to put that to the test, which we try and do on this channel with scientific data. Now, this is airborne transmission of respiratory viruses published in Science. Now, if you want to get a good review of a lot of things that we've learned over the past couple of years, this is a really good review of that. Long-range airborne transmission of SARS coronavirus 2 has been observed, this article says, in hotel quarantines and in a large church, but they're both indoors. So outdoors, blowing in the wind, the virus would become very diluted, and while viral particles could get into someone else's respiratory mucosa in the Chinese side, it would be very dilute and the inoculum would be very low. So I think it's very unlikely that this could happen. So I suspect this is the Chinese and the Koreans trying to cover up for the fact there's a lot of cross-border smuggling. But hey, we actually don't know. This could come from Chinese scientists, which, if it does, it would be interesting. Because we know that these Omicron variants are so transmissible. Could they blow in the wind? Well, I did put together a further piece of information here. Half-life of viruses in aerosols. Aerosols, of course, are the very fine droplets. So the big droplets that we breathe out will just drop to the ground. The bigger droplets will just drop out through gravity. The smaller ones will just be suspended in the air. But the viral particles in these smaller aerosols, the half-life is 3 hours. Now, what this means is if you start off with 1 million viral particles, in 3 hours' time there'll be 500,000. 3 hours after that there'll be 250,000. 3 hours after that there'll be 125,000. So it's not saying after 3 hours there's no virus left. It's just going down stepwise. So days later there would still be some viral particles left. So that is interesting. And 1 to 3 hours half-life. But SARS coronavirus 1 and SARS coronavirus 2 in laboratory generated aerosols, the half-life is up to 3 hours. So who's to say it's impossible? Interesting. We'll keep an eye on that. So I suspect, unfortunately, I wasn't able to detect any scientific references in the Chinese literature, but this is the closest I could find in terms of literature. But if you are interested, that is a really superb review article on things that we've learned, which are extensive in the past couple of years. So there you go. I'm afraid a lot of people are about to get the infection in China, and quite a few of those will die. Many millions of the 25 million people in North Korea currently have the infection, and many of those will die through malnutrition, untreated pathologies, and age, and lack of vaccine status. UK things are still going down. Bit of an uptake in the United States, but probably mostly explicable by the BA.4 and 5. Slight increase in hospitalizations, but I don't believe it's going to come to very much. Not minimising it for the individuals, it's still massive, but that's how I see it as a country-wide basis. So that's all I wanted to say. I think today about a COVID update. So fairly optimistic apart from those parts of the world. But of course, once the virus has gone through those parts of the world, they will develop huge amounts of immunity. It's just the cost they have to pay for that in the short term. Thank you for watching.